I discovered that my girlfriend was unfaithful, involved with a criminal. Determined to bring him to justice, I meticulously collected evidence and informed the authorities, ensuring his imprisonment and the destruction of both their lives. If you find reading difficult or unenjoyable, you might want to stop here. My tale is extensive and heartbreakingly real, a reality I wouldn't wish upon anyone, not even those I sought vengeance against. To share this story, I must confront and disclose aspects of myself that I prefer to keep hidden and am not proud of. At 19, my life took a drastic turn when my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The situation was incredibly tough, especially with my mother working from 9 to 9. I took on the responsibility of caring for him during his prolonged 4-year struggle with the disease. Unfortunately, he succumbed after undergoing a triple bypass surgery. His death profoundly affected my mother, altering her completely. I attempted to stay strong for both of us during these dark times, but the experience transformed me deeply. My academic performance suffered as I lost focus in school, and I had to take up an after-school job to support my mother, who was devastated. Something inside me shifted. My upbringing was relatively sheltered, with regular participation in church and its activities. After my father's passing, the prospect of attending college became daunting. Paying for it out of pocket was the only option, as I didn't qualify for any loans due to the financial strain at home and the constant need for extra income. My job barely paid minimum wage, leaving us in a stagnant financial situation. A friend introduced me to the world of drugs, suggesting that if I needed more money, I could work for him and his associates, who were involved in drug dealing. Eventually, I started delivering cocaine for them. After several months of this illicit work, I managed to save enough money to complete high school and fund my college education. In college, I maintained a low profile, avoiding flashy attire or extravagant spending to impress anyone. This approach allowed me to earn my bachelor's degree in 3 years, as I had ample free time. Initially, my ambition was to become a lawyer, but my encounters with corrupt law enforcement and officials involved in drug dealing led me to abandon that goal. Instead, I pursued a career in parallel law, eventually achieving it. During my time in college, I reconnected with a high school classmate named Rita. We had been close friends back in high school, both harboring mutual crushes that we never acted upon due to our shyness. In college, our friendship blossomed into a deep bond, and we became best friends. Our relationship gradually developed into love, and we began envisioning a future together. Both of our previous relationships had ended disastrously, especially mine. My ex-girlfriend, whom I'll refer to as Becky, had behaved coldly and heartlessly, leading to our breakup. Despite my efforts to save her from an abusive relationship and teaching her that no one deserves to be mistreated, she left me feeling shattered and incapable of love. It had been years since I intentionally dated anyone, as Becky's actions had left me emotionally numb. Reuniting with Rita gave me hope, making me realize that every past relationship had failed me, but with her, I felt a genuine connection. We took our relationship slowly over 2 years, with me opening up about my past, about Becky, my father, and everything that had happened. Rita was incredibly empathetic, providing the emotional support I desperately needed. We began living together, and our relationship thrived. We expressed our love for each other, making plans to start a family. However, our happiness was short-lived. Tragedy struck a few months later when my mother was involved in a severe accident. A large shelving unit had fallen on her, causing multiple injuries and broken bones. The neighbors found her and rushed her to the hospital, where it was discovered that she had a leaking heart valve. After a series of medical tests, we received mixed news. While her heart valve could be repaired, 5 small masses were found near her left kidney, indicating a high likelihood of malignant tumors. A biopsy confirmed that she had renal kidney cancer. She began treatment, and I knew I had to prioritize her well-being. Our relationship with Rita was going smoothly. We had moved to a town about 30 miles from my mother's home. When I shared my mother's health issues with Rita, she was supportive and understanding, assuring me that she wanted to be there for me emotionally without wanting to pause our relationship. I reassured her that if she ever felt the need to take a break or was interested in someone else, she could let me know, and I would understand. She promised that no one could ever replace me in her life. As my mother's chemotherapy progressed, initially, she seemed to tolerate it well without severe side effects. However, by the 2nd month, she began experiencing significant weakness and a loss of appetite. Throughout this period, Rita and I communicated frequently, texting and talking multiple times a day. We spent hours conversing before falling asleep, expressing how much we missed each other. Every couple of weeks, we had the opportunity to spend a night together, and everything appeared to be going well. However, my mother's condition deteriorated, prompting me to suggest that Rita enjoy her social life and outdoor activities during the summer, knowing that my mother's health would prevent me from partaking in such activities. Rita took this to heart, spending time with friends and sharing amusing stories about their outings. I was genuinely pleased that she was finding joy despite my mother's declining health. She continually showed concern and sadness regarding my mother's situation, but the chemotherapy was taking a toll on her strength. Realizing that the cancer was being managed by the medication rather than directly attacking my mother, I needed to take a break. A group of my mother's friends came to spend time with her, giving me some much-needed alone time. As I was nearing Rita's town, I called her and she provided me with the address where she and her friends were meeting. Upon arriving, I noticed most of her friends were already there. As I entered the house and made my way to the back deck, I saw a man sitting close to Rita. They were laughing and chatting with others. She introduced me to him as her boyfriend. His name was Henry. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a friendly demeanor. Although I maintained politeness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Henry. My past experiences with criminal activities had honed my instincts, and something about Henry seemed shady. He was new to Rita's circle, and none of her friends had known him long. It wasn't jealousy driving my suspicion. Rita had numerous male friends whom I liked. However, Henry's character gave me pause. I attempted to dismiss my doubts, attributing them to unfounded jealousy, and continued to engage with Rita and her friends, hoping to alleviate my concerns. I kept an eye on Henry from a distance, interacting with him warmly but cautiously. Over the next few weeks, my mother's health continued to decline. Rita and I stayed in constant communication, although, in retrospect, I realized I was the one primarily initiating our interactions. One day, some relatives offered to care for my mother, granting me a temporary respite. I decided to visit Rita, calling her on my way. She informed me of the restaurant where she and her friends were dining, so I headed there. As I parked, I noticed Henry getting into a sleek black Bic. He left without acknowledging me, and I realized he might not recognize my car. Inside, Rita and her friends welcomed me with hugs and words of encouragement. We had dinner and a few drinks before Rita and I returned to her place for the night. Before leaving, I casually inquired about Henry's sudden departure, but Rita claimed she had no idea he had been at the restaurant. The restaurant was part of a strip mall with multiple businesses, so perhaps he had come from another location without anyone noticing. That night, I stayed with Rita once more before returning home around noon the next day. Shortly after, my mother's condition took a critical turn, and she had to be rushed to the hospital due to pneumonia, a complication of her weakened state from chemotherapy. She remained hospitalized for 3 weeks, her condition worsening daily despite numerous medications. The doctors informed me that she had only about a week left to live. Understanding that she wouldn't want to remain in the bleak hospital environment, the staff arranged for her to return home, aiming to make her final days as peaceful as possible. Upon bringing my mother home, despite her extreme weakness, she was comforted by the familiarity of her house. We both knew her time was limited. She expressed her fear but also her desire for me to stay strong and mentioned she was ready to reunite with my father. Once again, I entrusted my mother's care to a friend from church for a few hours and decided to visit Rita without notifying her, as I was emotionally overwhelmed by witnessing my mother's suffering. When I arrived at Rita's house, I noticed a black Bic parked behind her car. Distracted by my mother's imminent passing, I used the spare key she had given me to enter the kitchen, where music was playing. As I walked down the hallway toward her bedroom, I heard noises that sounded sexual. My heart sank as I realized Rita and Henry were engaging intimately, completely unaware of my presence. My initial impulse was to flee and confront Henry violently, but I restrained myself to avoid jeopardizing my mother's care and my job. Instead, I quietly backed away, shaking with anger, and exited through the back into my car. I remained there, overwhelmed by the weight of betrayal, shedding tears silently. After about half an hour, I started my car and drove back to my mother's side, choosing not to share what I had just witnessed. Everyone assumed my tears were solely for my mother, though they were also fueled by the devastating betrayal I had just experienced. I struggled to reconcile my logical mind, which prioritized my mother's well-being, with the profound sense of deceit I felt towards Rita. The anger I felt was unlike anything I had experienced before, compounded by the fact that Henry had been excessively friendly towards me. If they hadn't been intimate from the start, perhaps I wouldn't have felt so enraged, but their actions left me seething with frustration and a desire for revenge. Determined to uncover the truth, I commissioned a private investigator to run background checks on Henry. From our first meeting, I had a gut feeling he was trouble. My past experiences with criminal activity had taught me to recognize shady characters. A friend from the firm I worked for provided me with Henry's records after a week, revealing numerous mugshots and a history of criminal behavior. Henry had been arrested multiple times for various offenses, including DUIs, reckless driving, possession of stolen goods, breaking and entering, and drug-related charges. His criminal record was extensive and worsening, with recent charges including the sexual exploitation of a minor and other sexual offenses. The depth of his criminal activity was shocking, and it became clear that Rita had been deceived by someone with a vile character. The realization that Rita might have been unknowingly involved with such a predator made me physically ill. I doubted that Rita had any knowledge of Henry's true nature, given her trusting and naive disposition, which had caused her issues in the past, but never anything like this. Anyone aware of Henry's criminal history would undoubtedly consider him reprehensible and believe he shouldn't have been released from prison. However, with my mother's funeral approaching, I had to pull myself together. By the time the funeral concluded, I was utterly exhausted and mentally drained. As I attempted to sleep, Rita called, unaware of my mother's passing and my knowledge of her infidelity. She had been reaching out frequently both before and after I discovered her betrayal. When I answered, I maintained a facade of happiness, not revealing any changes in my mother's condition or my awareness of her involvement with Henry. I allowed her to do most of the talking, internalizing every false word as if I believed her and valued her empty sympathy. When she expressed that she missed me, I reciprocated the sentiment, though in reality, if she had died at that moment, I wouldn't have cared. I took some time off work due to bereavement, knowing that my relationship with Rita was over. Part of me grappled with how cruelly she had treated me, whether intentionally or not. I was relieved to uncover the truth before any more lies and betrayals could surface. However, the pain and deceit inflicted upon me during a time when I was struggling to stay together felt utterly wrong. I longed for revenge, aiming to dismantle both of their lives without letting either of them know I was involved. To prepare for this, I contacted my company's Human Resources Department and completed the necessary paperwork under the Family Medical Leave Act to extend my leave beyond the standard 2 weeks. Financially, I was secure enough to sustain myself for at least half a year without working, giving me ample time to execute my plan. Seeking revenge on Henry was straightforward, given his status as a felon on parole. Any minor infraction could result in his reincarceration to complete his original sentence. However, I wanted more than that. I aimed to secure new charges that would significantly lengthen his time behind bars, ensuring he would never regain his freedom. I had met his parole officer on numerous occasions, and she was familiar enough with me to understand that a background check on Henry would reveal his extensive criminal history. I doubted Henry had a legitimate job, as owning a new BIC and maintaining insurance would require substantial income, which he likely obtained through illegal means. I parked my car discreetly down the street from Rita's residence, where Henry's BIC was parked. Waiting in silence, I observed as around 2 a.m., Henry started his engine and drove away. I followed him carefully, maintaining a reasonable distance to avoid suspicion. Henry's car led me to a rundown house in a less desirable part of Rita's town, where he parked and entered the residence. I noted down his license plate number and parked nearby. After several hours of inactivity, I stayed near his house until morning, then went out again to purchase breakfast. Throughout the day, it was evident that Henry was either surrounded by a large group of friends or heavily involved in dealing addictive substances like cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamine. Customers frequently returned for more drugs, and I took photographs and videos of each vehicle that stopped by to purchase narcotics. I continued this surveillance daily, documenting Henry's activities meticulously. Each night around 6 p.m., when Rita typically finished work, Henry would leave, leading me to follow him to see if he met Rita at a restaurant or went straight to her house. I grew increasingly certain that Rita had never visited his residence, at least not the one I had scouted. With substantial evidence gathered over 4 days, I decided to involve the local police. I compiled a comprehensive report, including 38 pages of photographs showing various individuals heading to Henry's door to buy drugs. I also saved all the videos I had recorded onto a SIM card and placed it in a small plastic box for safekeeping. Confident that this evidence would convince the police of Henry's illicit activities, I took the SIM card and the documentation to the town's police station in Reedstown. Upon arriving at the station, I approached the narcotics division, where a uniformed officer greeted me. After exchanging handshakes, I handed him my business card, which he scrutinized for several seconds before inquiring about my background. Despite not having passed the bar exam, my association with a reputable firm lent credibility to my information. I informed him that I had evidence he might be interested in, and he promptly led me to a conference room. After some casual conversation about mutual acquaintances, I presented him with a folder containing Henry's personal information, criminal record, and parole details, along with the SIM card. The detective reviewed the photos and remained silent, his expression shifting as he realized the magnitude of the evidence I had provided. He understood that this information could easily result in an arrest warrant for Henry, potentially leading to his long-term imprisonment. Appreciating the value of my contribution, he thanked me and inquired if I would be willing to testify. I explained that the evidence was so compelling that my testimony wouldn't be necessary. The detective then asked if there was anything I needed, to which I responded that I believed Henry had been released from prison too early and had not been rehabilitated, deserving to remain incarcerated for an extended period. Satisfied, he requested something in return for the information. I produced a photograph of the black Escalade with its license plate number, pushing it toward him. I mentioned that the vehicle's owner might be involved in even larger-scale drug dealing and insisted that my name remain out of any police or court reports. He agreed and, shortly after, returned with a printout of the license plate details, including the registered owner's name and address. I folded the document and pocketed it, exchanged some more casual conversation about sports and cars, shook hands with the detective, and left the station. Confident that a judge would soon issue an arrest warrant for Henry, I kept a close watch on the local police reports, monitoring the progress of Henry's case through Rita's local newspaper and online sources. One morning, the newspaper's front page featured a photo of a bewildered and confused Henry being led away in handcuffs. Assuming there were no procedural errors that could allow him to evade conviction, it appeared that Henry would be serving his original sentence plus additional years for the new charges. While there was always a chance that a skilled lawyer could reduce the charges or find a loophole for his release, I was determined to prevent that from happening. Just 10 minutes after seeing the headline, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Rita's number. When I answered, I feigned surprise and happiness without a genuine greeting. She inquired why I hadn't informed her of my mother's passing, having seen the obituary in the city newspaper. I responded that she seemed preoccupied with enjoying life and that I didn't want to burden her with my grief. I quickly diverted the conversation by asking why she hadn't been in touch as much recently, prompting her to change the subject and request a meeting. I forced myself to act happy about hearing from her and expressed that I missed her. I suggested we meet for dinner at our favorite restaurant in town, and she readily agreed, especially since Henry was no longer around to monopolize her time. Rita was pleased to have me back to fill the void in her life. When I arrived for dinner, I greeted her with a smile and a long hug, trying to suppress the intense urge to lash out physically. To my surprise, she didn't react when I kissed her on the cheek, likely assuming that my grief had dampened any romantic inclinations. I had a clear idea of what she had been up to and wanted to avoid any chance of contracting Henry's lingering influence from prison. We sat at the bar and ordered drinks from our favorite bartender, who recognized us as a couple due to our generous tipping habits. I excused myself to the restroom and sent a brief message on my phone, instructing the bartender to prepare my drinks without alcohol and hers as doubles. Upon returning, I joined Rita at the bar, discussing the drinks we enjoyed without mentioning the alterations I had requested. The bartender approached, asking if we were ready for another round. I explained that we were celebrating after not seeing each other for some time and showed him the message I had sent. He understood and smiled, acknowledging that the drink I had requested was one of his specialties. Rita and the bartender likely assumed she could handle her drinks and that we would continue our evening together. As the night progressed, we ordered several more drinks. Rita commented on how strong hers felt, while I acted as though I barely tasted the alcohol in mine. After a few hours, I paid for our dinner and drinks with a substantial tip and prepared to leave. I pretended to receive an important phone call, explaining that I had to rush back to my office for an urgent matter. I asked Rita to wait at her house, assuring her that the errand wouldn't take long. Once she was safely in her car, I discreetly used my cell phone to call the police, reporting that I had witnessed a drunk driver leaving the restaurant. I urged them to respond quickly, knowing that the individual was not in a condition to drive safely. I then hurried back to Rita's house, which was only 2 miles away. As I approached, I saw blue lights and realized that Rita had been pulled over. Unbeknownst to both of us, Henry had been using Rita's car to distribute cocaine to low-level dealers under his supervision. The police conducted the standard search and found several ounces of cocaine hidden beneath the back seat. My intention wasn't to get Rita arrested for drug possession with intent to sell, but the fact that she had given me spare keys that same night indicated a level of trust that had been severely breached. Neither of us were aware of Henry's true nature, and I knew that Rita had been unknowingly complicit in his drug operations. Realizing the depth of her betrayal, I felt a mix of emotions but focused on the broader scope of my plan. That evening, after returning home, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I answered to hear Rita crying and trying to explain her situation. I managed to calm her down, genuinely wanting to hear what she had to say. She informed me that she was in jail, prompting me to ask where and for what reason. Upon learning about her arrest for drug-related charges, I was genuinely shocked. Rita requested my assistance in getting her released, asking me to post bail. However, given that my mother had passed away and I couldn't afford to put up any of my property due to probate issues, I declined. Her drug charges were collateral damage from her betrayal, and I felt that what she had done deserved the consequences she was now facing. I attended her arraignment and sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, hoping to go unnoticed. When Rita saw me, I gave her a look of confusion, feigning ignorance about how she could have been arrested for such a crime. She tried to explain that her boyfriend had been asked to deal drugs days before, but the judge was uninterested in hearing her excuses. Realizing that I knew about her infidelity, she looked at me with shame and tears in her eyes. I shook my head in disgust as she was led away, fully aware that any attempt to contact me again would be futile. Bond was set extremely high for both Henry and Rita. Henry pleaded guilty, seeking leniency by foregoing a trial, but he received none. Rita's trial occurred a few weeks later, where she accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 4 years with the possibility of parole after 3. Her career was effectively over upon her release, and I felt no remorse. They had both interfered with the worst person they could have possibly crossed, especially during the most challenging time of my life.